That. Zoom out a little. I think you can hear me. Okay. 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6.
Good evening. I'm Phil Herron, editor of the Delaware County Daily Times and DelcoTimes.com. Welcome back to another edition of our live stream internet broadcast. We call this little show Live from the Newsroom. It's where we take the people and the issues that are making headlines here in Delaware County. We bring some of those people into our office in beautiful downtown Primos, and we talk about the issues of the day. Once again tonight, it is our most great fortune to be out on the road again. We are here in Chester, Pennsylvania on the campus of our partners, Widener University, and we are sitting once again in the glittering and gorgeous new television studios here on Freedom Hall on the Widener campus. And we have got two topics that we're going to talk about tonight. First, we're going to talk about what is probably the biggest issue in the country right now. Not just Delaware County tonight, we're going national tonight. We are going to talk about the Affordable Care Act, in particular Obamacare, as it's often referred to. And then later on in the show, we're going to get an opportunity to talk to some Widener students who are going to be heading out to Harrisburg for something that is referred to as Lobby Day out in Harrisburg. They're students here, and they obviously have some issues that they would like to see brought to the fore in the state capitol. But first, I am very lucky tonight to be joined by a person who's going to talk about both important ends of the spectrum when it comes to health care and the Affordable Care Act. I'm joined to my right by John Culhane. He's a Widener law professor and director of Widener's Health Law Institute. Professor, welcome to the show. I guess first things first, let people know what exactly is the Widener Health Law Institute?
Well, it's just what it sounds like. We are a policy and teaching institute at the Widener Law School, and we run programs, certification programs for students interested in specializing in health law. We bring in speakers and do symposia, around health law issues, and we go out and speak in the community and at forums like this. So basically anything you can think of relating to the intersection between health and law, that's what we do.
It's interesting with the huge spike in the conversation across the nation when it comes to healthcare. Are you seeing more kids being interested in that field?
Yes, very much so. We have good enrollment in our basic health law courses, our upper level electives, and students coming into my office with all kinds of questions about employment opportunities. So.
All right, first, a little news. If you have not yet heard it, and if you're still wondering, there actually has been an extension. We were building it to a crescendo to the March 31st deadline on Monday of people having to enroll in the healthcare exchanges. That has been extended, sort of. John, you can explain to people what I mean by that. I'll put an asterisk on that, and then I'll leave it to the expert to explain.
Right. So it's not like the other extensions that you've heard so much about. Extensions of time for large employers and middle-sized employers to basically cover their employees. This is a much more limited extension. And the idea here is that if you are in the process for a period of time, if you've been in the process of enrolling, but you just can't finish by the 31st of March, you can have some extra time. Not specified exactly how long. And this would be people, for example, who have translation problems, who don't have English as a first language. Or for people that are in the process of enrolling, especially younger people who maybe can't get documentation for identification as quickly as people that have an established credit history. So that's the idea. And the expectation is it'll be about 2 or 3 weeks at the most.
But this is not still something that people should wake up Monday morning and say, hey, you know what, I guess I better get about registering for that one of the exchanges.
Oh, but of course they will, right? I mean, it's human nature. So if my deadline is Monday the 31st, I might still think, especially if I haven't been following close attention, I could just do it on Monday. And those are the people I think this extension is trying to capture.
All right,
but not a good idea.
There you go. Why don't we go back to the beginning, or at least the start of the beginning, and that is, not surprisingly, the Affordable Care Act wound up before the nation's highest court. And in June 2012, the divided court ruled 5-4, upholding the Affordable Care Act by ruling that the requirement that most Americans obtain insurance or pay a penalty was in fact something that it was already authorized by Congress, that the Constitution already permits such a tax. John, you in agreement with that?
I am in agreement with it, although it was an odd way for the court to reach its decision. I think a lot of
Some of us actually said it wrong when they first came out. Everybody said, oh, they're knocking it down, and then later on we realized that they had.
It was this compromise where Chief Justice Roberts wasn't willing to say it was a valid exercise of Congress's power under the Commerce Clause, but they said, well, it's a tax, and they've got the power to tax and spend, and therefore that saves it. But one of the things that's interesting is they didn't completely save it. So what they did was to say that the Medicaid expansion, which is a huge part of it, is optional. Yeah. And what you found since then is 25 states have accepted it. 19 states have rejected it, and 6 states, including Pennsylvania, are still considering whether or not they want to do this.
Or come up with their own plan.
They'll come up with their own plan, but then it has to be approved by the feds,
Right.
and it's unclear whether that's going to happen.
Right. At the same time, the court also, by this very same, again, divided vote, only this time with Justice Roberts swinging to the conservative side, said that the administration's main argument that the mandate was justified by Congress's power to regulate interstate commerce wasn't necessarily going to hold up.
That's right. That's what they said. And so Justice Roberts was the swing vote, and he sided with the conservative justices on the Commerce Clause issue, but rescued it by this idea that it was the power to tax. A lot of constitutional scholars were in disagreement, but the court gets to have the last word on the Commerce Clause. And this is seen as potentially powerful stuff going forward.
All right, when you talk about, it's a good thing, I suppose, that we have students from Dr. Wesley Leckrone with us, and also Professor Angie Corbo, and doing some public relations, because they roll out the Affordable Care Act, and literally into their lap falls one of the truly great public relations nightmares, in the fact that the website had all kinds of problems. So immediately they find themselves digging out of a huge hole. But it didn't change the underlying current, and that is simply this. Why is healthcare, and specifically government, a really hands-on program of healthcare, why is that such a lightning rod?
Well, how much time do we have? I mean, I think that's a great question. And in a lot of countries, it's not this kind of lightning rod, right? So in most of the other countries we like to compare ourselves to, they have a guaranteed health care for all, and they spend a lot less of their gross domestic product on health care than we do. I think the second highest is 12%, and we're spending 17% and not necessarily getting better outcomes. So you would think it would be sort of a no-brainer to move towards some kind of universal system, but that's not been our history. And for complicated reasons that my political science colleague can probably speak to with more authority, it's always been resisted. So going back to the 1930s, Franklin Roosevelt proposed in the Social Security Act that they include universal coverage. And so it's been something that's been on the table kind of intermittently for, I guess, the better part of 80 years at this point.
Also joining us on the panel tonight is political science professor Dr. Wesley Leckrone. Wes, obviously a hugely politically charged element, got the backing of the court, goes to his next rollout, and then immediately face and having to face another huge setback, and that is from the day one, the belief by most, according to the Obama administration, and the wording is, hey, if you like your policy, you're going to get to keep it. And then, lo and behold, well, not exactly. How big a problem does that become for the administration?
Well, I think ultimately the problem for President Obama was up until that point, most Americans personally liked the president and believed in things that he said. And that gains you a certain amount of political capital, even when people don't agree with your positions on the issues. Yeah. And what you've seen since that time, since the rollout, is essentially that public opinion supporting him as an individual has kind of declined.
Right.
And that is particularly harmful for a president who's in the latter stages of his second term.
Right.
When basically Congress doesn't feel the need to run with him or on his agenda, and the president has to hang out there on his own. So it becomes a very difficult political situation for him.
John, obviously, as I indicated, hugely partisan issue.
Right.
Very, very deep-rooted beliefs, pro, con. But in looking at the big picture, something that the country needs.
Well, we had 48 million uninsured Americans, okay? 48 million, that's a tremendous number. I've said it 3 times on purpose, right? And the expectation
They wanted to have 6 million people sign up.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, the
They've
goal
had
was
5
6 million, they've got 5 million.
Right.
I think the goal was 7 million originally. But remember, we're just talking
The other
about
million are the people that are waking up Monday morning.
Right, they're the Monday people, right, with their cup of coffee saying,
Yeah.
damn it, why didn't I do this sooner? But that's only the exchanges. So you have to look also at the idea that more large employers are going to be providing health insurance. And of course, the Medicaid expansion all by itself was supposed to take care of 16 to 18 million. Now the expectation, sadly, from my perspective, is that we're still going to have about 30 million people uninsured at the end of the day. So while this is a public health success story, it's not a complete success story. And I think, 10 years down the road, we'll be looking at ways to get more people covered. Meanwhile, the House of Representatives just earlier this month, for the 50th time, a balloons fell from the ceiling.
If at first you don't succeed.
Right, 50 repeals, and of course it's totally political. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
But I think you're seeing some of that really firm partisanship really digging in even harder.
How about a couple of nuts and bolts issues? Cost. Is this thing working for people?
Depends on whom you talk to, right? So for younger people, right, who have the option of buying a catastrophic plan, or some of them can still be on their parents' plans.
Which is a huge constituency that they really wanted to get involved in this program.
That's right. They are very important. The people sitting over there are very important to the success of the Affordable Care Act, because they're the ones who are healthy, and it's a form of subsidy, just like people paying into Medicare is a form of subsidy, right? So the idea is it's a kind of subsidy of people like me who are getting older, who are going to need more health care, right? So it critically depends on them. If you are a younger person, you can get a pretty good deal on your health insurance, depending on what level of plan you want. Now, if you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s, the costs go way up, and you could be looking at paying $400 or $500 a month or even more. And obviously, that's a concern, depending on your income. Of course, there are subsidies available, and they're pretty generous. So not until you get to $90,000 for a family of 4. That's when the subsidy totally phases out. So there are affordability issues, but the real issue is that health care is expensive. It's a valuable commodity, it's an expensive commodity, and I think one thing this whole debate has done is to kind of get consumers sensitized to the price of what a commodity really costs.
A couple of specific instances that I've come across and have been pointed out to me again and again and again, and that is one in particular, the so-called working poor, who don't really hit the levels that would qualify them for the subsidies. The bottom line on some of these people are saying, even if I wanted to, I can't afford it. It's not part of my, daily budget.
So this is really a problem in particular for people in states that haven't done the Medicaid expansion. Because the idea there was the Medicaid expansion would go up to 133% of poverty level. If this is sounding too wonkish, stop me. But that was the level, right? And then above that, you'd qualify for a subsidy. And the subsidies could be pretty generous. And when you couple them with low premiums for bronze level plans, the idea was to make them affordable to everyone. Now, if the state didn't do the Medicaid expansion, all right, then you've got these people in the middle who aren't eligible for Medicaid but are too low for the subsidies, because that group wasn't anticipated to exist at the time the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, was enacted.
The other end of that spectrum is something that I've heard from any number of people who have pointed it out and said it has literally been a lifesaver, and that is people who have found themselves in obviously what has been a very difficult economy, out of work, and they have found to their, much delight that they have been able to get coverage through this program at a much less cost than what some of the COBRA programs were.
Of course. So,
and that's will get them to the point until they're, these are sometimes, what we refer to as seasoned employees. I guess people like me in their late 50s who are looking for a bridge till they get to 62.
Right. So COBRA, for those who might not know what that is basically a way of getting coverage for a couple of years from the time you stop your current employment. You're basically allowed to continue purchasing the insurance that you had under your employer. But that's expensive because you're paying what your employer paid. The idea here is that for a lot of people, this will be cheaper. Okay, this will be cheaper coverage. You can go on the exchanges and shop for a plan that you can afford. So I don't want to talk too much about the negative parts of the Affordable Care Act, because a lot about it is great. And what's expected to be great in the long run is the idea that people are going to have more kind of job portability, that people are not going to be so tied to a job that they don't like or that isn't right for them because they're so dependent on the health insurance. What they can do is, if they're thinking of starting their own business or want to move from one place to another and maybe don't have that next job lined up, is they can purchase coverage on the exchanges. And one thought is that within a certain number of years, that the exchanges will slowly come to supplant the employer-based coverage, because it will give people ultimately more flexibility. That's the idea of it anyway, or one possible outcome.
I'll turn to some of the young people, the Widener students that are joining with us tonight, and I hope that you all realize, I'm sure that your parents probably do, that you are one of the great success stories that's being heralded under the Affordable Care Act, and that is this plank in the program that allows young people until they're age 26 to stay on their parents' health care programs. I know I used it. It helped me with my kids. But tell me, and we'll start right here in the back. Is this something that young people are talking about? Is it something that concerns them? Are they aware of it?
I would say for those of us, especially those of us in college who aren't concerned about trying to find a job right at this moment, that it's not necessarily something that we are concerned about.
You want to put that off as long as you can, by
Exactly.
the way.
I mean, my parents have, I've talked with my parents about it, and I plan on going to grad school after this, and they said, we're not going to retire until you get out of school, so that way you don't have to worry about paying for health insurance at all.
That's great. And next.
My parents work for the government. They work for the state, so I fortunately have the exact same thing. My parents have covered me. Same with my siblings. All of my siblings are 25 and under, so my parents are able to help us with that.
The buzz on campus, kids, is it considered cool to talk about healthcare?
Well, it is now. I'm more on the PR side of things, so we've been handing out the postcards at the political science side.
Oh, great.
They can sort of talk about. So it's kind of created more of like a discussion about it between my classmates. So.
In front?
Yeah, the postcards have really helped because you really get to find out what people's really biggest concern is about after college. You don't really know, because some people could be on tuition remission or an international student and aren't exactly dealing with those problems, but it is a huge general concern.
And next to you?
I think it's something that needs more attention from people our age. A lot of college students don't really think about it, but if they realize the availability of being on their parents' plan until 26, they'll see that it's really a good idea.
John, we probably should mention that there is a hammer involved here that was a fairly important part, and that is that if you do not sign up for a plan, how serious a situation are we talking about?
So it depends. So in the first year, it's not so bad. It's like $95 or 1% of your income, and then it goes up to a certain percentage. But it can be in the thousands of dollars, and it might still be cheaper for people to pay this, what we're now calling a tax, you can call it a penalty, but now pay this tax instead of obtaining health insurance. But the idea behind it is that you will think twice. You'll say, wait a minute, why should I pay this tax or penalty to get nothing when for a certain amount of additional money I could have decent health insurance? So there is a hammer, but I think also it's a way to change the public conversation, or to get people to think a little bit more about what it means to be a responsible citizen and to sort of pay what you can for your health insurance. And again, because of the subsidies, to the extent these are calibrated correctly, no one should be paying more than they can reasonably afford for health insurance. At least that's the idea.
And John, if you could, we had mentioned earlier about the idea that Pennsylvania is in fact one of the states that did not decide not to set up the government exchanges. So
That's right.
Where does that put Pennsylvania?
Well, it puts them in good company because more than half the states went the same way as Pennsylvania. New Jersey is another one. Maryland does have a state exchange, right? So in the local area, there are all different kinds of options. And all that means is that the federal government is operating the exchanges rather than the state, doing some of the administrative stuff, really all the administrative stuff. If I were a state governor, I would want my state to be more hands-on. I think I could be more responsive to my citizens. But keep in mind, there's huge political pressure in states that are, shall we say, not pro-Obama, to not do anything that looks like it's supporting the Affordable Care Act. And just to make one more point about this, from a financial point of view, it makes no sense for a state not to accept the Medicaid expansion. It's a huge amount of money to the states. Even when it phases down completely, it'll still be a 90% federal contribution, only a 10% state contribution, okay? Within particular states, even conservative states, right, there are hospitals and there are doctors lobbying for the states to accept the expansion. Why? Because without it, they have to eat the cost of the uninsured. So it's purely political not to accept the expansion. And this is some of the stuff we're dealing with Obamacare.
If we finally, on healthcare, if we didn't have enough electricity running through this issue in the nation this week, thanks to another legal challenge, we added one more wrinkle to it. And I guess if you were going to try to pinpoint an area that if you wanted to add to healthcare, you would get into contraception, religion, and church and state. And the Supreme Court now is going to take up the issue, John, of whether corporations have religious rights and thus the right to restrict contraception coverage under the Affordable Care Act for their employees. And again, the court seems to be split.
The court is split, and court watchers think that once again it's in Justice Kennedy's hands, although in the Sebelius case it was Justice Roberts who was the swing vote, but in most cases it's Justice Kennedy who's kind of the pivot point, and in this case he gave support to both sides, and the question is whether a privately held company, right, can basically say to its employees, we don't want to pay for the insurance or for contraceptive coverage that you would otherwise be entitled to as an essential health benefit under the Affordable Care Act. And the Supreme Court has to decide whether, first of all, a corporation is sufficiently a person that it can assert this kind of religious freedom, and then secondly, how much of a burden of religion or a burden on religion is this mandate. And I think we'll know more in June.
Yeah. Wrap up in terms of the Affordable Care Act. Where do you think we wind up going from here?
Well, I think one interesting thing that I read was that in a paradoxical way, a lot of the most serious objections to the act will probably fade once Obama is out of office, even if his successor is another Democrat, but particularly if it's a Republican. Because a lot of this is tied up, even the fact that it's called Obamacare, right? When you have legislation, it's not the FDR Act, it's Social Security, right? So this is a very unusual thing to do, and a lot of this is kind of flashpoint anger against Obama. So I think once he's gone, you will find states accepting the Medicaid expansion because it makes sense. You will have people trying to figure out, right, how to get all those uninsured people insured. And I think there's no going back at this point. I mean, there will be tweaks, there will be amendments, But I think once people start to see that this really has an effect on their lives, that they can get coverage, that they can move from job to job without being worried about it, I think you're going to see kind of an inevitable push toward acceleration, but I think that will take a good 5 to 10 years, but that's just a guess.
John, thank you very much. Great discussion. Let's turn to Dr. Wesley Crone and his class, Interest Groups in American Politics. The course he offers here at Widener along with Angie Corbo. And they're gearing up for an event that's held out in Harrisburg called Student Lobby Day. Wes, give us a feel for what's going to happen there.
Sure. So Widener's part of the Association of Independent Colleges and Universities of Pennsylvania, which luckily the acronym is ACUP, which makes it a little bit easier to say. And there are about 84, 85 different private schools around the state, including Newman, Rosemont, some other schools in the area. And basically we'll all gather next Tuesday in Harrisburg, have a nice little breakfast with some state legislators, and then go out and hit on probably about 15 different state legislators. We're going to meet with them. We've got a whole packet of information that we're going to give out to them and try to do a little one-on-one lobbying, or advocacy, sorry.
And what specific issue are you looking to hammer away at?
Well, one of the things that we're most interested in, about $36 million was cut from Pennsylvania Higher Education Association's budget a couple years ago. And what we'd like the government basically do in Pennsylvania is to reinstate that $36 million in the form of a middle income debt relief grant. Middle income students whose parents make between about $80,000 and $110,000 a year have the highest amount of debt when they get out of college. Because if you make more than $110,000, you got enough money to be able to pay out of pocket. You're less than $80,000, you're more likely to get Pell Grants and other things. So it's the middle class that kind of gets squeezed. So we're pushing for that.
I tell people in the office and this all the time, and people look at me like I have about 15 heads, but one of the things when I went through that process with my kids in college, one of the most disheartening things that I discovered was that I had been told the wrong thing for years and years and years, and that is no one bothered to tell me that you get penalized for saving money for college.
Yeah, that's true.
It's just a really, really difficult issue. But some of the students in Dr. LaCrone's class are going to be taking part in Lobby Day out there in Harrisburg, students. So what I'd like them to do is please, we'll start in the front, introduce yourself and what you'd like to see accomplished on Student Lobby Day in Harrisburg.
My name is Rosemary Walker, and I am the junior communications major for PR and advertising. And on April, at our lobbying day, I hope to see the grant be pushed to the next step so it can help the middle income students like myself. Because as a junior right now, I'm really not as concerned as I should be, but I know after college it will completely set in, and then I'll be even more stressed out than I already am.
You got to pay them back, unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not free.
Yes.
Next, right there, next door there.
My name's Sarah. I am a political science international relations major. I'm a freshman here. And I really hope that during our lobby day we advocate properly so that way we can affect the lives of about 60,000 students applying for grants. With the money put back in the system, 60,000 more students will be able to accept these grants, and then they'll be able to shop around for which college they'd like to attend. So that way the money is not specified to a state school or a private school, and they can really make the decision for themselves.
All right, in the back, we'll start out on the far end.
All right, I'm Alex. I'm a junior communications studies student. I'm kind of interested, because this is all kind of new to me, not being a political science major, so I'm kind of interested to see what kind of impact the students can actually make, because we're so used to kind of getting talked at, being told how it is. It's kind of interested that we get the chance to actually go to Harrisburg and kind of lobby for ourselves and kind of our interests. So.
I'm Emily. I'm also a political science major. I'm a junior, and I'm really interested in going. I've never actually been really involved. I'm a political science major. I actually transferred here, so this is something that's really great for me. I've never actually been hands-on with politics, though, and as this personally affects me and my family, we fall square right in that bracket. And I have a younger brother, and graduating college, I'm going to have to decide whether taking time off or going straight into grad school with no time because of those college loans are going to hit me right after I graduate. So
Sure.
it'll be really interesting to see how I can personally make a change for my own future.
All right.
I'm Andrea Stickley. I'm a senior political science student, and I've actually been a part of this whole process since it was started about 2 years ago. And I went last year to Harrisburg to lobby for ACUP when this whole thing sort of started with the Middle Income Debt Relief Act. And you know, last year I saw what it was like to talk to representatives and senators and how they were sort of a little weary about a bunch of college students coming in thinking, you know, they know it all and everything like that. But when we were able to present them with facts and reliable statistics, it was interesting to see how much they were kind of accepting of what we had to say. And so I'm really hoping, because we were there last year and we sort of have this brand name behind us of CSC Cube, that they recognize us again this year because we're going there with that same brand and we're, you know, advocating for the same issue, that they're going to be like, I remember you, you guys are still doing great things and we're going to back you on it.
Wes, there's a story in the news in the last week or so, which I found pretty interesting, especially when it comes to colleges in the state here in Pennsylvania, and one in particular in the region. And I was wondering if you happen to notice that the push by Westchester to withdraw from the state system, and what your feelings were on that.
Well, I have to step lightly because we're a private school here. But I think that was Senator Dinniman's kind of idea to allow Westchester to secede from the union, so to speak. I think, you know, the problem is declining enrollments at state schools. The loss of subsidies at state schools has really hurt them. And one of the problems with that is their tuition now, because they have to increase to make up for the state subsidies, puts them much more on par with private schools.
Right.
So it's a bad time to be a state school right now.
Yeah. It's interesting that certainly as part of this mix, and I guess the timing for the students' visit to Harrisburg would be pretty good, is that our governor, Governor Corbett, finds himself in a